Welcome to episode number 12 of the series dedicated to medieval Asia. Today, we're shifting our focus to the Ming Dynasty in the mid-15th century. More specifically, we're diving into the Tumu Crisis of 1449. It was a clash with the Oirat Mongols that really shook the Ming Empire. It had lasting consequences for their reign.
The Tumu Crisis really shows us that even empires at their peak can be vulnerable when there are weaknesses inside and pressures from outside. To really understand how big this event was, we need to first look at the Ming Dynasty before 1449.
Okay, so the Ming Dynasty started in 1368, and for a while they were really strong and doing well. But by the middle of the 15th century, there were signs that things were going downhill. Could you explain some of those signs?
Of course. One of the biggest problems was the decline of the Ming military. The army used to be so strong, but now it had all sorts of problems, like corruption, not enough training or resources, and people were getting complacent. They had a system called the Suo system. It was supposed to keep an army of 2.5 million soldiers ready, but it was very inefficient. A lot of the soldiers who were registered weren't actually doing their jobs, and their weapons and equipment were not in good condition.
That's a big difference from the image of a strong empire. So how did all these problems inside the Ming Dynasty affect their ability to protect their borders, especially against those threats from the north?
Well, when the military is weak, it makes it harder to defend the borders. Cities in the north like Xuanfu and Datong were important. They were like buffer zones against nomadic groups, especially the Mongols. Even though these cities had strong walls, the overall lack of preparedness made them weaker.
So we have a Ming Dynasty that's getting weaker and struggling with problems. Now let's talk about the threats they were facing at the same time. Let's talk about Esen Taishi, the leader of the Oirats. They were a powerful group of Mongols. What can you tell us about him and how he became so powerful?
Esen Taishi was very ambitious and a skilled leader. He was able to unite the different Mongol tribes, and his influence went beyond the traditional Mongol lands. It reached places like Korea and Central Asia. For example, he conquered Hami, which was a very important city for trade on the Silk Road. This victory not only gave him control of a key trade route, but it also showed how strong his military was.
It sounds like he was a force to be reckoned with. So now we have a weakening Ming Dynasty and a powerful Mongol leader in Esen Taishi. It seems like a clash was bound to happen. What were the main reasons why the relationship between the Ming and the Mongols fell apart in the years leading up to the Tumu Crisis?
Trade was a big part of the growing tension between them. The Mongols really depended on trade with China. They would trade horses for things they needed, like tea and silk, and the Ming military needed those horses for their cavalry. But the Ming government started worrying about how powerful Esen was getting, and they were concerned about having so many armed Mongols near their borders.
So they tried to control trade to limit Esen's influence. How did the Mongols react to this?
It actually made things worse. The Mongols felt like the Ming were trying to take away their economic lifeline, and that they were being disrespectful. This made them resent and distrust the Ming even more. And in 1449, something happened that pushed them closer to war. Esen sent a message to the Ming court with a bold request.
What was this request and why was it considered so audacious?
Esen asked if his son could marry a Ming princess. The Ming court immediately said no. They thought it was a direct challenge to their power, and a way for Esen to try and make himself seem more important. The Ming emperors believed they were superior to everyone else. The idea of a Mongol leader marrying into their family was just unthinkable. This rejection was the final straw for Esen.
So we have a recipe for conflict brewing here. The Ming Dynasty is internally weak, and they're facing a powerful Mongol leader who wants more power and influence. Trade relations have broken down, and Esen's marriage proposal was rejected. It's a very tense situation, ripe for confrontation. And then in the summer of 1449, Esen decided to unleash his forces. Can you tell us more about the Mongol invasion and how the Ming Dynasty responded?
Esen, driven by his ambition and the insult from the Ming, he carefully planned an invasion with 3 separate attacks. One force attacked the Liaodong Peninsula in the east. Another force went for the important city of Xuanfu, and the main force, led by Esen himself, marched towards Datong. The Ming's response to this invasion would turn out to be a very bad decision, a decision that would have terrible consequences.
The Ming Emperor at the time was Yingzong. He was young and didn't have much experience as a ruler. He made the decision to personally lead the Ming army into battle. This decision was strongly influenced by his advisors, especially a eunuch named Wang Zhen, who had a lot of influence over the emperor. But many people in the Ming court were against this idea. Experienced officials like the Minister of War, Kwang Ye, and his deputy, Yu Qian, thought it was a foolish move. They knew the army wasn't ready for a big fight, and that having the emperor on the battlefield would make him an easy target for the Mongols.
They were right. They understood that the army was not prepared for a major campaign, and that the emperor's presence on the battlefield would make him a prime target. They also questioned why they were putting so much trust in Wang Zhen. His ambition and lack of military experience made him a risky choice to lead such an important expedition.
But their warnings were ignored. The Ming army, quickly put together and poorly equipped, left Beijing in August of 1449. It was a huge army, maybe 500,000 soldiers. But from the start, they had problems. Poor planning, not enough supplies, and questionable leadership.
Yes, the march itself was very difficult. The soldiers had to deal with constant heavy rain, they were running out of supplies, and they kept getting attacked by small groups of Mongols. The army's logistics were a mess, which meant the troops were hungry and exhausted. There are even stories of soldiers starving to death during the march, which shows just how unprepared they were.
And on top of all that, the soldiers were unhappy. They didn't like the harsh conditions, and they questioned Wang Zhen's decisions. There was even an attempt to assassinate Wang Zhen. This shows how desperate and frustrated the soldiers were getting. When the Ming army finally got to Datong, Wang Zhen got reports about the Mongol forces. The reports said that the Mongols were very strong and in good positions. Wang Zhen finally realized how serious the situation was, and maybe he could sense that the soldiers were getting restless. So he decided to give up on the campaign and ordered a retreat.
Unfortunately, the retreat would be even worse than the advance. The army was demoralized, disorganized, and vulnerable. They weren't ready for a long march back to the capital. They were easy targets for Esen's forces, who were just waiting for the right time to strike.
And this is where we reach the turning point of the Tumu Crisis. On August 31st, the retreating Ming army set up camp at Tumu. It was a post station northwest of Beijing. It was a bad choice for a campsite. They didn't have access to water, and there wasn't much natural protection. And this is where Esen, who knew the Ming army was retreating, this is where he decided to trap them. He surrounded the Ming army, he cut off their water supply, which made their already bad situation even worse. This set the stage for the Battle of Tumu, a battle that would have a huge impact on both the Ming Dynasty and the Mongols. But we'll talk more about that battle in the next part of our deep dive.
When we left off, the Ming army was trapped at Tumu, a really bad spot they picked during their retreat. They were demoralized and weak. It was a situation that set the stage for the Battle of Tumu. This battle would show just how vulnerable the Ming dynasty was, and it would highlight Esen's skill as a military leader.
The Battle of Tumu happened on September 1st, 1449. It was a huge win for the Oirat Mongols. The Ming army was exhausted, thirsty, and poorly led. They were just no match for Esen's well-organized forces. The Mongol cavalry, known for being fast and flexible, they really did a lot of damage to the disorganized Ming army.
Esen was a brilliant strategist. He used the terrain to his advantage, and he used tactics to make the Ming soldiers even more scared. He understood how important it was to disrupt the enemy's supplies and their morale, cutting off their access to water. He made the Ming army's already terrible situation even worse. They were completely open to a decisive attack.
The Ming's defeat at Tumu was quick and devastating. They lost a lot of soldiers, and the once mighty Ming army was completely routed. But then, in the middle of all the chaos and fighting, something really shocking happened, something that would have a huge impact on the Ming dynasty. Emperor Yingzong was captured by the Mongols.
Capturing the emperor was a humiliating blow to the Ming dynasty. It showed just how bad their defeat was, and how vulnerable they had become. News of the defeat at Tumu and the emperor's capture, it reached the Ming capital, Beijing, on September 2nd. The court was in complete chaos.
The Ming court had never faced a crisis like this before. They had to make some tough choices, and they had to make them fast. The Empress Dowager's son and the key officials, they had to find a way to bring stability while also dealing with this urgent situation.
One of the most pressing issues was how to defend Beijing. The main army was gone, the emperor was a prisoner, the capital was wide open to a Mongol attack. Some officials were afraid of the Mongols. They thought they should move the capital south to a safer place. They believed defending Beijing was a lost cause.
But other people in the court disagreed. They were led by Yu Qian, the deputy minister of war. They thought abandoning Beijing would be a huge mistake. They said it would be terrible for the Ming dynasty's reputation and morale.
Yu Qian was a strong advocate for defending the capital. He became a very important person during this crisis. He was a brilliant strategist. He was determined, and he could inspire people.
Yu Qian believed they could defend Beijing. He understood the Mongols' strengths and weaknesses. He knew they were strong in open battles, but not so good at sieges. He said that if they made the city wall stronger and gathered enough supplies, and rallied the remaining Ming forces. They could fight off a Mongol attack.
He was so convincing, and his strategies were so good that Empress Dowager Sun and other important officials agreed to his plan.
Yu Qian was given full authority to organize the defense of Beijing. He immediately started working on strengthening the city's defenses. He called in troops from other areas, and he inspired the people to resist the Mongols. Meanwhile, Esen, the Oirat leader, was thinking about what to do next. He had won a big victory at Tumu, and he had the Ming Emperor as his prisoner, a very valuable bargaining chip. At first, it seemed like Esen was open to negotiating. He sent people to the Ming court, offering to release the emperor, in exchange for a large ransom and recognition of his authority.
But Esen's goals were much bigger than just a ransom. He wanted to use the emperor as a puppet to control the Ming dynasty. It was a strategy that Mongol leaders had used successfully before. He thought if he could put a weak emperor on the Ming throne, he could control the dynasty and make it serve his interests.
While the Ming court was trying to defend Beijing and figure out what to do about their captured emperor, they also had another problem, the question of who would be the next emperor. With Emperor Yingzong gone, there was a power vacuum. People were worried about whether decisions made while the emperor was a captive would be legitimate.
There were two main groups in the court. One group wanted to wait for Emperor Yingzong to come back. They said he was still the rightful ruler, and that doing anything while he was gone wouldn't be right. But this approach was risky. Nobody knew when or even if the emperor would be released.
The other group said they needed a new emperor now to provide leadership and stability during this crisis. They suggested that the captured emperor's younger brother, Zhu Qiu, the Prince of Cheng, should become the emperor.
But some people resisted this idea. They were still loyal to Emperor Yingzong, and some were worried about what it would mean to replace an emperor who was a prisoner.
Yu Qian, who was leading the defense of Beijing, he was strongly in favor of appointing a new emperor. He said that delaying the decision would only make things more unstable and weaken the Ming dynasty's position. He believed a new emperor with clear authority to rule could unite the people, strengthen the defenses, and negotiate with Esen from a stronger position.
His arguments made sense. The Empress Dowager Sun was worried about the threat from the Mongols, and she knew they needed a strong leader, so she reluctantly agreed to make Zhu Qiu the new emperor.
He took the reign title Jingtai. This marked a new chapter in the Tumu Crisis and in the history of the Ming dynasty.
But making Jingtai the emperor didn't solve everything. Esen saw that the Ming court was divided, and he decided to use that to his advantage. He marched towards Beijing, but not to conquer it. He wanted to put Yingzong back on the throne as his puppet. Esen thought this would create more problems for the Ming leaders and make them weaker.
So Esen arrived at the gates of Beijing, not as a conqueror, but as someone trying to put the old emperor back in power. He said he was the one who was bringing the rightful emperor back to his throne, but Yu Qian saw right through Esen's plan. He had carefully prepared for the defense of Beijing. He knew Esen's forces were strong in open battles, but they weren't equipped for a long siege.
Speaking for the Jingtai emperor, Yu Qian refused Esen's demands. He called Esen a barbarian invader, and he accused him of using Yingzong for his own evil purposes. Esen was surprised. He had expected the Ming court to be more willing to negotiate. He was angry that they had rejected him, so he ordered his troops to attack Beijing.
But the Ming defenders fought back bravely under Yu Qian's leadership. They pushed back the Mongol attacks. The Mongols were used to winning quickly in open areas, so they were frustrated by how stubborn the Ming troops were. After several days of attacks that didn't work, Esen realized he couldn't take Beijing by force. He was also having problems with supplies. They were running low, and his troops were suffering from the harsh winter weather.
Esen was losing soldiers and running out of supplies, so he decided to give up on the siege and go back to the steppes. His plan to use Yingzong as a puppet had failed. The Ming dynasty, even after their terrible defeat at Tumu, they had shown they could defend their heartland. This was a turning point in the Tumu Crisis. When Esen retreated from Beijing, it gave the Ming court more confidence, and it made Esen look weaker to the Mongol tribes.
Now that the immediate danger to Beijing was over, the Ming court had to deal with the problem of their captive emperor, Yingzong. Esen's plans had failed, and he was facing growing opposition from his own people. He realized he couldn't keep Yingzong prisoner anymore. He had to find a way out of this situation without looking weak.
So he did something unexpected. Esen offered to release Yingzong without any ransom. He was hoping to create a problem for the Ming court. He knew that if Yingzong came back, it would challenge the Jingtai emperor's right to rule, and it could make the Ming government unstable.
It seemed like a kind offer, but it was a clever trick by Esen to cause more trouble in the Ming court. He was using Yingzong as a political weapon. hoping to take advantage of the complicated rules about who would be the next Ming emperor.
As we were discussing, Esen's offer to just let Emperor Yingzong go, no ransom or anything, it put the Ming court in a very difficult position. You see, it was a clever move, because it would make the tension about the Jingtai emperor's rule even worse.
I can see that. So what happened when the Ming court heard about Esen's offer?
Well, there were mixed reactions, as you can imagine. Some officials, especially those who had always stayed loyal to Yingzong, they saw this as a great opportunity, a chance to put the rightful emperor back on the throne. They thought it was the honorable thing to do. And they believed that Yingzong coming back would bring stability back to the dynasty.
But I imagine not everyone agreed.
Exactly. Others, especially those who supported the Jingtai emperor, they were very suspicious of the offer. They worried that Yingzong's return would create more instability and maybe even lead to a civil war. They argued that because Yingzong had been defeated and held captive, he might be under Esen's influence and could be used by Esen to interfere in Ming affairs. They also pointed out that the Jingtai emperor had actually done a good job during this crisis, and there was no real reason to remove him from power.
So the court was divided.
Yes, very much so.
And what about the Jingtai emperor himself? How did he feel about this?
Well, he was in a tough spot. He didn't want to welcome back his brother, who was a direct threat to his rule. He also didn't trust Esen's motives. He thought it could be a trap to cause chaos within the Ming dynasty.
So what could he do?
He couldn't just ignore the offer. To refuse the release of a former emperor, it would have looked really bad. People would think he was being heartless and only cared about power.
It sounds like a no-win situation.
In a way, it was. The Ming court was really split on what to do. The stakes were high. Whatever they decided would have a huge impact on the future of the dynasty.
So what did they do?
After a lot of discussion and pressure from different groups within the court, the Jingtai emperor agreed to let Yingzong come back to Beijing. It was a decision made out of necessity, not because he wanted to. He realized that saying no to Esen would cause more problems than it was worth.
But wasn't Yu Qin against this? The one who defended Beijing?
Yes. Yu Qian strongly advised against letting Yingzong return. He thought it would destabilize the Ming dynasty and could undo all the work they had done to restore order after the Tumu Crisis. He argued that because Yingzong had been a prisoner of the Mongols, they couldn't trust him anymore, and he might even be working for Esen.
So they ignored Yu Qian's advice.
Unfortunately, yes. The Jingtai emperor was under pressure from people who wanted Yingzong back, and he was afraid of what would happen if he refused Esen's offer, so he didn't listen to Yu Qin and allowed his brother to come back to the capital.
So in 1450, Emperor Yingzong returned to Beijing after a year as a captive. But it sounds like this didn't mean the end of the Tumu Crisis.
You're right, it actually marked the beginning of a whole new chapter.
What do you mean?
Well, Yingzong's return created a lot of tension in Beijing. The Jingtai emperor was still officially the emperor, but now his brother was back and it undermined his authority. Yingzong was welcomed back, but he was basically put under house arrest. He had to stay in the southern palace within the Forbidden City. This was a way for the Jingtai emperor to limit Yingzong's power and prevent him from trying to take over.
But Yingzong wasn't going to give up so easily.
No, he still wanted to be emperor again. He started to gather supporters within the court. He acted like the wronged brother who was waiting for the right moment to strike back. And the court was split. Some officials remained loyal to the Jingtai emperor, while others were persuaded by Yingzong's claims and his promises of rewards. They started to support him again. It was a very tense standoff, with both brothers fighting for power and influence.
So how did this power struggle end?
Things changed dramatically in 1457. When the Jingtai emperor got very sick, Yingzong saw his chance. And with the help of his loyal followers, he staged a coup. His supporters, who included powerful military leaders and unhappy court members, they took control of important places in the capital, like the palace gates and the armories. They quickly overpowered the Jingtai emperor's guards and took control of the Forbidden City. The coup happened fast, which showed how well they had planned everything and how much support Yingzong had within the court and the military.
So Yingzong took back the throne.
Yes, once he was back in power. He removed his brother from the throne and put him under house arrest, just like what had happened to him years before. The Jingtai emperor lost all his power and his title. He basically disappeared from history. His reign was just a short interruption in Yingzong's time as emperor.
It sounds like Yingzong was determined to stay in power this time.
He took the reign title Tianxin. This marked the beginning of what's known as the Tianxin era. His second reign was a mix of different things. He wanted to be practical. He wanted revenge on those who had opposed him. And he was ambitious to make the Ming dynasty powerful again.
What did he do?
First, he rewarded the people who had supported him during his exile, and he got rid of those who had been against him. Sadly, one of the people he punished was Yu Qian. Even though Yu Qian had played a crucial role in defending the Ming dynasty during the Tumu Crisis, Yingzong saw him as a traitor because he had supported his brother. Yu Qian was falsely accused of treason and executed not long after Yingzong took back the throne.
That's really tragic.
It was. Losing Yu Qian was a big blow to the Ming dynasty. He was a brilliant military strategist and a skilled administrator. He had helped to stabilize the dynasty during a very difficult time.
It sounds like Yingzong had learned from his mistakes.
He realized he needed to make the Ming military stronger, so he made changes to the Waiso system, improved the training and equipment for soldiers, and put capable generals in charge. He also worked on making the government more efficient and reducing corruption. All these reforms were meant to fix the problems that had led to the Tumu Crisis, so the Ming dynasty would be ready for any future threats.
So the Tumu Crisis was a turning point for the Ming dynasty.
Absolutely. It revealed their weaknesses, both internal and external, and it led to a lot of conflict and instability. But the crisis also showed how resilient the dynasty was.
How so?
Even though they suffered a humiliating defeat, and their emperor was captured, they were able to survive and recover, and part of that was because of people like Yu Qian, who rallied the Ming forces and protected the capital from the Mongols.
So what lasting impact did the Tumu Crisis have on the Ming dynasty?
It marked the start of a slow decline in their military power and their status in the world. The crisis also changed how they interacted with other countries, especially the nomadic groups. The Ming emperors became much more careful. The memory of the Tumu Crisis would stay with the Ming dynasty for a long time. It was a reminder of how important it was to have strong leadership, a prepared military, and unity within the dynasty.
The Tumu Crisis is a truly fascinating event.
It is. It teaches us a lot about how power works, the challenges of being a leader, and the resilience of empires. It's a story of ambition, betrayal, and ultimately survival.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Tumu Crisis. We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions in the comments below. And please subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history.